outside their cage to talk with Senator Kevin S. Parker of the 21st District. We also have Sean Hobbs, Dave Woodby, and Jay Russell here with us. Hello, Senator. Thanks for the interview.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
I would like to start off, and we're talking about the MMA bill that is stirring a lot of controversy and a lot of hope in New York that it will finally be passed. Now, we know it's going past the Senate, it's now onto the Assembly, but you described the bill as being important. What would be the importance of this bill, in your opinion?
Well, the big importance really is economic development, right? So I represent a district of Brooklyn, which is Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. It's a district of about 318,000 people. And so, you know, people are looking for jobs all the time, right? And so we're always looking for ways to bring in economic activity into New York City and New York State. Currently, as you know better than I do, MMA is literally the law of the land in 49 of the 50 states of the United States. And so we're waiting to make it the law of the land here. What literally is happening right now is that people are at Times Square announcing bouts and then going across the bridge and having the bouts in Jersey.
Right.
And so, you know, we're doing all the promotion, but we're not getting the economic activity. Our estimates tell us about $16 million per event would be generated from MMA bouts in New York City. And we go outside of New York City, places like Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, Albany, you would have about $2 million per event in economic activity. That's a lot of money. Talk about, you know, per venue, you know, having upwards of 10 events per year. And that we're now starting to talk about some real money. And so we really have been, you know, on this as both an economic, you know, push for the state of New York, but also we really want to regulate it. You know, I was just having some conversation with Jay about some of the early years in MMA when there was almost no regulations. I mean, now we have, you know, UFC and other groups regulating in some degree. Without a law, we can't properly have the New York Sports Commission, Athletic Commission, come in and actually provide rules to make sure that combatants are safe.
Right, and that's one thing in amateur in the upstate area as well as downstate area with the promotions we deal with and the events we cover. Fighter safety is job one. That always is, and that's what we hope continues with regulation and with sanctioning coming in. So let's keep our fingers crossed with that. Now, you stated that $2 million in this area, $16 million downstate. Now, is that the whole? I guess what I'm trying to say is that state money, or is that?
That's economic activity. So
okay.
We're not even talking about what the state makes, right? We're talking about that's the economic activity. Obviously, municipalities and the state will eat a little bit off of that.
Right.
But that's primarily about how we create jobs, right?
Exactly.
We're talking about, you know, every time we have an event, all the things that are around events, people providing apparel, people providing food, you know, all the things that it takes to set up, the media crews. Like when you start adding up all of those expenses, in New York City, you're talking about $16 million in economic activity per event.
Right.
And then $2 million upstate New York per event. And so, like I said, when you start then multiplying it per events around the state, we then start talking about real activity. And that's what creates the jobs in places like Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo.
Yeah, and a lot of people when they talk about the economics of it, they're feeling that the state will be making that money. They're not realizing that it's the jobs that are being created with the restaurants, the hotels, the clothing providers, and so on and so forth, because people will be bringing in, you know, I mean, we go to events outside of the state, we pay for hotel rooms, you know, so I mean, there is, you know, we're paying another state and supporting outside of the state to go watch our professionals fight. It's kind of silly.
That's right. And we have a lot of really quality New York State residents who are MMA fighters.
Oh, without a doubt. Just in this upstate area, I could name 10 of them right off the bat, and I don't want to start naming names because I know I'm going to leave somebody out. You know, but right up here we have kids that, not kids, but professionals that fight for Bellator, WSOF, UFC. I mean, they cover all the big organizations. So, you know, it's nice to stay in our home state and give back to the local community and our state.
Absolutely.
You referenced in your, I watched your video of your last session speech about MMA, and you referenced gambling, and that's approved in New York State. I wrote a similar article stating, you know, we have gambling, but we won't allow MMA. It kind of seemed like real weird to me. I don't know if we were on the same page with that, you know, with gambling becomes addiction and a lot of other things.
Right.
And yes, I understand the injury standpoint of MMA, but people don't realize we have gambling here that could be more harmful than an MMA match.
Yes, I totally agree with you. In fact, I originally drafted the bill in the Senate that allows MMA to be legal in the state of New York. I drafted it back in 2009. And some of the same people who have voted over the last couple of sessions to allow gambling to be legal in the state of New York are now saying that they don't want MMA. So it's okay for people to get addicted on gambling, and mortgage their kids' future, lose their homes, and do other stuff because they're gambling, but you're afraid of one, they were making the argument initially about violence, and then they were making the argument about injuries. And I'm like, well, first of all, it's such a select number of people, so we're not talking about vast numbers of injuries.
Right.
The other thing I noted in my conversations that the vast majority of the MMA fights, especially the professional fights, end in submissions, not in knockouts. And so, because you have so many submissions, there's really not as much striking to the head and those kind of, and so the level of brain trauma that people were talking about was really overblown. Right. And it's really, you could tell that people had not really consumed the sport in a really rounded way so they can see what's happening.
Right.
I'm actually frankly more concerned about the injuries on the amateur level because we're not regulating them in a way that I think is uniform across the board, and that's because the state hasn't chosen to do that yet. And that's part of, I think, making it legal and sanctioning it and sanctioning the bouts is the first step in that process of making sure that safety is first for the people who participate. But we also long term want to see this as a sport that our young people are being engaged in. Every place across the state of New York right now, we're having problems with our young people, and a lot of them are looking for things to do. This certainly could be an alternative to some of the gang activity that we're seeing in every single major city across the state of New York. I don't know if you know this, but I actually was a martial artist as a young man, studied Taekwondo, and then later on got a black belt in Tongsu Muay. And so this was something that I was involved in as a young person. It taught me a lot, about fair play, about balance, about trying to keep my, have a historic anger management problem, keeping my temper and down. Trust me, it could have been a lot worse than what you've seen.
Right.
But that being said, is I think that's something that would be really beneficial for our young people across the state.
Sure, and especially where we are, we're at Hot Gates MMA today, where we have these gentlemen with us with Op Strike Force, Dave Woodby with Hook'em Fight Gear, with MMA, and Jay Russell, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, this is why they're down here, and this was one of their reasons for opening, was to get the children here, not out there.
Absolutely.
To give them the discipline that they may be lacking, not just in MMA outside, but in MMA and practicing. We know Sean's boxing background, Dave's MMA background, Jay has an MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. So when you come here, you're brought into the family, and you're not out there doing probably what you should.
But you're also not just learning the sport, and not just learning how to defend yourself, and not just learning how to take care of your body, right? And not just learning how to connect your mind, your body, and your spirit. But these men are also businessmen. They all own their own businesses. You're seeing how they collaborate together. It's the kind of skills that you need, again, not just as a young person, but what you're going to need to build your life into the future.
Right. And
we're hoping, especially because this sport is so young, that many of the young people will eventually take it over down the line and become, businessmen and women of their own, in doing this. And again, this is something that men and women can be involved in. Ronda Rousey, who was up here a couple of weeks ago, is, as I said in my conversation on the floor, she's the Muhammad Ali of MMA right now. Like, she is the name.
Right.
It's not like there's some man that's parallel with her. She's the big name right now.
Exactly.
And certainly that, I think, is good for the sport. Obviously, it's good as we are, at the end of March, which is Women's History Month, and we try to honor and look to the things that women have given to our society. Certainly, we're seeing that women in MMA compete on an equal playing field as men.
Right, and it's funny you bring that up. Technically, Warriors Instinct MMA is a woman-owned company. Not many people know that. It's a woman-owned company. So it's, when people say it's degrading and stuff, our company is owned by a woman.
Right.
If she felt it was degrading, we wouldn't be here
Right.
right now. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
And so that
She
that's
wears the
what-
black belt in the family.
Exactly. You already know that. You heard about it. I just have a question about the bill itself, and maybe if you could give, not an answer, but if you knew the reasoning, or people might be interpreting it different. Because part of the bill is saying that MMA will be done if an event charges admission for amateurs. It will then be professional. So if we had an event here at Hot Gates, they charged admission to come into the amateur event, it would now be a professional event.
Yes.
And that would, at that point, basically wipe out amateur, because they're not amateurs. If the state's going to deem them professional because there was a price at the door, isn't that taking a step backwards? Because where do we stand with amateur MMA then? Okay, we finally legalized professional, but now we don't have amateur. You know?
What they're doing right now is a lot of, and this room, because it hasn't passed yet,
Yes.
because it hasn't been signed by the governor, obviously there's issues, we can certainly talk about them and figure out how we work around them. Simply what we're trying to do in the context of this legislation is to create a dynamic where MMA is kind of parallel to boxing, and that's very similar to what they do in boxing. And so what they're trying to do is also create a delineation and saying when money is involved, you're now moving from an amateur to a professional status. Now, if that doesn't work, then that's a place that we need to start having some conversations about, figuring out how we can adjust the legislation.
Right, definitely. Because if you're trusting,
Amateur boxing?
Not in all amateur boxing, in some bouts, but it depends on how they're sanctioned.
Right.
And so, that's part of why I'm saying that we have to have a conversation
Sure.
with the New York State Athletic Commission about what, in fact, what are the levels, what constitutes, a sanctioned bout versus a non-sanctioned bout, and how do we get those
Yeah,
things.
like I said, we're looking more for clarification for it, because there's rumors, there's articles stating that, amateur will now be done, because you charge $15 at the door, $25 at the door, and you can't watch an amateur bout now.
Right.
I understand that the amateurs, if it was worded that the amateurs cannot receive any compensation,
Right.
that would be different. You know what I
Certainly,
mean?
certainly, this language.
Right.
Again, we're a ways away from this happening right now, so there's plenty of time.
And that's what people have to understand. This, just because what you see is not what will actually be there, are room for change. There's people working on that right now.
Right.
So when it does hopefully pass this year,
Absolutely.
we'll have that there.
If I can, the state of Pennsylvania, when you're doing the shows there, if you're doing an amateur card, it has to be a pro-am card, as I understand it. You have to have at least 2 professional bouts on the card, and then the rest can be amateur. You get a
If you're charging an admission.
I'm not sure if it's either or,
Okay.
but as I do know that, I think that's like the blanket.
Right.
for
Because
the entire
in
state.
our legislation, and as he's indicating, the trigger for us is the admission. So if you're charging $1, it's automatically a professional. And what I'm hearing from you is that doesn't make sense, given how the sport is currently being marketed.
Well, you're also
and
going to
developed.
take away. You need the amateur.
Right.
You need that. I mean, that's the amateur. Right. It's the amateurs where that is where the growth and development starts.
Right.
That's where the guys are. That would mean that guys are going to leave if they're an independent. They're going to leave their independent gym. Some guys are training in garages, basements. We
Right.
started out in the basement.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're gonna go from this basement to a pro level, and you're gonna be expected to compete. Right. That's you're automatically gonna come in as the minnow in
Right.
that shark and minnow scenario.
I don't know, but I'm assuming the shows must cost money. Even if it's amateur, it must cost a little chunk of change to run the event.
Right.
So I don't know. I would just think even if it was
So the biggest difference between a pro and amateur, they both charge to get into the event. We all know that. The difference is pros get paid, the amateurs learn a lesson and they learn their craft, and they don't get paid.
Right.
So they end somehow in the legislature, I know you know that, you're gonna have to differentiate what they're doing here.
It's certainly something we can work on. So.
Right. Yeah, let's hope, that we don't take a step backwards. That's all I think a lot of the community is concerned, the MMA community. Now, in your opinion, just an opinion, do you think this is the year for legalized MMA in New York State?
So everybody has an opinion.
Right.
And
That's why I said in your opinion.
That, right?
Yeah.
Well, but I'm gonna give you my analysis of it. I think there's a chance that it certainly can happen today. When I say today, I mean in this
Yes.
this legislative session. In the state of New York, the legislative session lasts from the first week of January to the last week of June. So we're trying to get this done, obviously, before June. We can be called in beyond June, so July to December. We can be called in either by the president of the Senate or by the governor. And so it can certainly happen at any point throughout the year as well, but less likely to happen if we don't get it done by the beginning of July. And so right now we've taken our first step, which is the passage of the Senate. The governor has indicated that he would, depending on the wording of the bill, would certainly be favorable upon it. And then now we're looking at the state assembly. The part of the problem with the state assembly is that it actually got banned in the state assembly. So we're worse than most states. Not only we're 49 in terms of not making it legal, is actually a professional bout in the state of New York is actually illegal. It's not even not sanctioned, it's actually illegal. And so part of what we're doing with the bill is we're repealing that and then legalizing it so that we can sanction it and we can regulate it. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to get that done. I think some of the politics around it is a little complicated, both around, because there's only 63 members of the Senate, and you see there's a fight to get it through there. There's 150 members of the state assembly. So, it's a bigger debate, there's more people. But I also think there's a lot more politics that have to do with the union, that have to do with UFC, with, other, organizations that are involved with organizing sport. And so hopefully they can figure all those machinations out, and we can get a bill to the floor in the assembly and get this passed.
Yeah, because UFC has already set a date for Madison Square Garden, and Bellator Scott Coker went on the record last night stating that he's waiting. He wants to come into New York with Bellator. So do you think they're jumping the gun?
No, I think that they should get their plan going, and I think we should continue to move towards a victory in the assembly and having a good bill that works for everyone.
Awesome. Do you gentlemen have any questions for the senator?
No, I just want to take time and thank him for coming down to the hot digs.
Absolutely. I love the gym. I love the gym. Thank you.
Anybody have a question for the senator that we may be able? We'll take 2 questions. Is that okay, Senator?
That's fine.
Questions?
The current.
Could you just introduce yourself?
I'm Ed Kenner. I'm the executive assistant to the president of the United States Muay Thai Association.
Okay.
We are one of 2 third-party sanctioning bodies in New York State for Thai boxing, amateur MMA, and kickboxing. Going back to what you said, the New York State Athletic Commission wants to kind of shadow the way boxing is done, but the wordage in the bill doesn't allow that to be done.
Right.
New York State Athletic Commission has never had any control over amateur sports in New York State. They always give it to a third-party sanctioning body: Boxing, USA Boxing, Adirondack Boxing Association, and so forth. How do we keep that on track? I mean, it's self-evident that the verbiage in the bill needs to be corrected, or we're going to be in a situation where we are now, where pros are fighting in the state, but amateurs have to go to Vermont to fight.
Right.
And you're still losing that economic money because
you're making a very, very good point, and I think part of this is that, again, the bill first got drafted like 6 years ago,
yeah.
right? And so this sport has grown leaps and bounds in 6 years. Like, it seems like
That's
only
true.
6 years,
Right,
but,
yeah.
but it's a very, very different dynamic. And what we knew about the sanctioning bodies and the availability, and how big even the organizations like yours have grown in that 6 years is very, very significant. And so I think there's a way to look at it differently now. And that's why I said there's ways that we can in fact change the bill to make it work for everyone. Right now, we're just trying to get it discussed and get people at the table and get the things resolved that we have to get resolved. And certainly, as I hear from you, this is one of the things. Again, we are less concerned about the amateur sport outside of safety than it is about how do you create an economic industry that in fact creates jobs around the state. And I think we were kind of more involved in that. And so, and to be honest with you, probably some of the amateur stuff has gotten neglected or not handled the way it should be. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you about your specific proposals and see if we can get those things added to the bill.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else?
I'd like to just mention something.
Could you just introduce yourself?
My name is Shaker Hafiz. I train under Jay Russell. He's my coach. You mentioned something about you like how MMA, the fighters are going to take into consideration about jiu-jitsu, how jiu-jitsu won't really hurt the guy, brain trauma and stuff like that. MMA, like, this is from like my like experience, and I'm just looking at it from like a scientific point of view. It's a lot more safer than boxing. With boxing, when you knock somebody out and they get knocked out, they get a standing 10 count, and right then in that little window of time, you're more susceptible to permanent injuries. But in MMA, as soon as you get knocked out, the ref just, it's over. And plus, like, not only that, there was one fighter, Damien Mike, he mentioned something. He's like, he likes to submit people instead of hurting them, because this way, you're not going to hurt them. You're just going to, impose your own will, but kind of like a beneficial way, not a beneficial way.
No, I understand. And again, I made that same point on the floor of the Senate that most of the fights are done by submission. Again, if you look at Ronda Rousey as a perfect example, her last 2 fights have been less than a minute, right? I think her whole career has been less than 15 minutes. She's been fighting. Right, less than 15 minutes. This interview has been longer than her whole career in the ring.
I think only 3 of her fights were not submissions.
Right, right. So most of her fights are submissions, and that's what we're seeing more and more of, is people winning by submission than they are. Although I don't get it wrong. I like a good knockout, but that's not really where the vast majority of the bouts are heading, and so the safety issues, as you've indicated, are mitigated and can be further mitigated. And this is the point that, frankly, I made to my colleagues, that we have opportunities. The New York State Athletic Commission is just like any other state agency for us. It's like the Department of Transportation or the Department of Health or any place else. We have an ability as state legislators to, in fact, help with the rules and regulations. And so if there's something that we don't like, we certainly can petition them, and because we appoint them. Actually, the governor appoints them. We, as members of the Senate, confirm their appointments onto the commission. And so we certainly have an opportunity to influence their thinking on these issues, and certainly that's one of the things that we think we're willing to do.
There's also what gets overlooked is you have options in MMA that you don't have in boxing. You can always tap out.
Right.
Always, you can always opt to get out of the fight if you feel as though you can stop this fight. Boxing, there's none of that.
Can I tap out this interview?
Yeah.
No. Keep going.
It's true though, in boxing,
Right.
if you go down, you're looked down upon if you don't get up.
That's right.
And jiu-jitsu, if you tap, you're
That's
not
right.
really.
Right.
It's
Right.
normal.
The culture is a very different, a different culture,
Yes.
and people understand what it.
You're not gonna-
Right. No, people understand what a tap out is,
Right.
Versus anything else.
So you have the fighters actually
Except
have
for one.
more control,
Control.
of that situation than they would have in boxing or any other real, combat sport,
Right.
or full contact sport. That's what you have there. You have that option to get out, which I feel like it's been overlooked repeatedly,
Yeah. Agree.
and on a safety
Right,
level.
exactly. Good point, Dave. Anybody else?
I believe that it's more, I've seen more injuries in boxing than I ever did in MMA.
Agreed. And that's, again, a point that I've made on the floor time and time again is, we had, look, a couple of weeks ago, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out. Right? I mean, like, there's a lot of places where fights are happening that are not being regulated in nearly the way that MMA is, right? And so there's an opportunity, both within the context of the rules that we're seeing nationally, but also we have an ability in the state of New York, through the New York State Athletic Commission, to set our own set of rules, and we can make it the safest sport in the state if that's what we choose to do. But what I've simply said is that we need to have fairness. If we're going, if we have, combat sports like boxing being regulated, let's regulate it in a similar way. We have things like fast speed pitch baseball, and we have collision sports like football happening here. Let's not discriminate against MMA like it's something different than in anything else that we're doing already. And that's really has been my argument. I actually think that these safety arguments are less of an issue in terms of passing this legislation than some of the politics, to be honest with you. And so I'm hoping that this year we can move past the politics. We can get this done, and we can do something good for the athletes, good obviously for the promoters and the people who are involved in the business end of this, and certainly we want to do something good for the consumers, because this is a growing sport, and more people by the day want to see it and want to participate in the sport at every level.
Right.
So you watch it,
I do.
and you have an appreciation for it because you did the martial arts.
Yes.
every senator did like 2 weeks of martial arts?
Let's get them down here. Let's get them down here.
Gym is
Bring 'em
open.
in.
Let's get 'em
Gym
down
is
here.
open.
I've actually suggested that we settle some of our disputes about the bills. And we'll build a little octagon and
Bring it to the hot days.
yeah.
Bring it right down here.
Fight
You're
solves
close.
everything.
You know, forget going to the Capitol. We'll come down here, you know, and decide what's best for the state of New
Put a
York.
big suit around.
Full training facility, showers, everything, so it'll be all set. One last question.
So my name is Steve Whitetekka. I also train under Professor Jay Russell here at this gym. I got kind of a two-part kind of question. One part is, since putting this bill in the process, has anything been consulted with the Nevada State Commission or the New Jersey State Commission, which kind of have like set the bar for mixed martial arts like legislations?
Not
bill's
yet.
passage?
Not yet, only because that the commission conversations wouldn't happen until after the
No, I'm
legislation.
just asking for the rule.
I got it.
Wait,
I got it. Let me explain.
Okay.
The commissions actually set the regulations.
Mhm.
The enacting legislation that allows it to be legal is done by the state legislature.
Yes, sir.
All we're simply trying to do now at this point is saying, let's make it legal. We've done very little to, in fact, say, here are the specific things that you need to do. That's not really our job. That's the athletics commission's job. Once we actually enact it and make MMA legal in the state of New York, then it's up to the New York State Athletic Commission then to look at Jersey, look at Nevada, and look at the best cases in places that look similar to New York to look at their rules and figure out what's best here in New York.
Okay. And
What's the second part?
Second part question would be kind of piggyback on, since this area is known for running their amateur mixed martial arts, and to help just piggyback what everyone else is kind of, more of their comments have been toward helping out of increasing the idea of mixed martial, the amateur part, so we don't lose that. Has there also been any, like, just talking to other assemblymen or senators to make sure we keep the amateur martial art by paying attention to, like, the tough enough promotion?
To be
everyone's
honest
in
with you,
Nevada?
we have spent most of our time thinking about this around professional bouts, and I've admitted that. And from this conversation, I think I'm able to go back to Senator Griffo, who is the prime sponsor of this bill in the Senate, and our co-sponsor or our assembly sponsor, and then talk to them about how we in fact make sure that amateur MMA is protected in the bill, which again sounds like from the comments I'm hearing today is not sufficiently protected. And so we'll look at it and figure out what we need to do and hopefully come up with a better bill, and maybe that'll help push the process a little bit in the assembly. Thank you.
Well, Senator, we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I know you have to get
Great.
to work, and
Yes, at some point we got to pass the budget.
yeah, you have to get.
I got
You
that.
got to tap that. Thank you to Sean Hobbs, Hobbs Strike Force, Dave Woodby, Golden Fight Gear, Jay Russell, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They make up Hot Gates MMA. They're open at 70 Tivoli Street, right here in Albany. Here we are in their cage, and thank you, gentlemen.
We have the most frequent events,
Yes, that's right.
big facility, parking.
That's right. There's events here every 2 weeks, amateur MMA bouts. The gym is open, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, strength training, striking, boxing. One-stop gym right here at Hot Gates MMA.
Right here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Good.